There is a man I want you to think about. He may be your son. He may be a colleague. He may, if you're honest, be a version of yourself you've spent the last decade trying not to become. He is sharp, genuinely sharp. He can dismantle any argument in the room. He can find the flaw in every tradition, the contradiction in every faith, the naive assumption behind every certainty. And he believes in nothing. He doesn't believe in nothing because he's stupid. He believes in nothing because he is the intended product of a machine. A machine built over 500 years with very smart architects and very specific goals. Tonight I want to show you how that machine works, because the answer is not what you think. The instinct, when you watch someone you love retreat into this kind of cold, exhausted cynicism, is to look for a personal explanation. He fell in with the wrong crowd. He read the wrong books. He chose comfort over conviction. Those answers are not without truth, but they are looking through the wrong end of the telescope. The cynicism you're watching in the people around you, in the generation that went to college and came back a stranger, is not a personal failure dressed up in intellectual clothes. It is the logical, predictable output of a methodology that has been running for over 100 years. And tonight I want to show you the methodology, where it came from, and what it was always going to produce. There is a question planted in what I just said, and I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes. If this is a machine, a real mechanism, with architects and blueprints, why didn't anyone warn us? Why did we send our children into it without knowing what it would do to them? We'll get there. But first, I need to introduce you to a man who saw it coming. In 1864, a Russian writer published a short novel in 2 parts. Fyodor Dostoevsky called it Notes from Underground, and its narrator, the Underground Man, is one of the strangest, most uncomfortable figures in all of literature. He is not a villain. He is not stupid. He is, in fact, extraordinarily intelligent. He sees through everything. Every social convention, every moral claim, every offer of friendship or love. He sees the mechanism underneath it, the self-interest, the hidden assumption, the logical flaw. He is relentlessly, brilliantly right about everything he tears apart. And he is completely paralyzed. He can't act. He can't love. He can't will anything. He sits underground. That's the image Dostoevsky gives him. Underground, alone, staring at the ceiling. The Underground Man is not a portrait of stupidity. He is a portrait of intelligence that has been trained in exactly one direction: refutation. He knows how to say why things are wrong. He has never been taught how to say what is right. And Dostoevsky, writing in 1864, before any of the institutional machinery we're going to discuss tonight had been built, was issuing a warning. He was saying, if you train a mind only to destroy, do not be surprised when it cannot build. The solvent cannot also be the adhesive. This is the oldest version of the story. But it remained a literary warning until the universities turned it into a curriculum. Let me take you back further. Not to 1864, but to 1637. René Descartes, a French philosopher sitting alone by a fire in a heated room in the Netherlands, decided to doubt everything. Not because he was nihilistic. Descartes was a devout Catholic, but as a method. He wanted to find what could not be doubted and to rebuild knowledge on that foundation. The famous result: I think, therefore I am. What matters for tonight is not the conclusion, but the move. Descartes established systematic doubt as the gateway to all serious thinking. You begin by tearing down. You doubt your senses, your memories, your inherited beliefs, your teachers. Only what survives the doubt is worth keeping. It was a powerful method. It produced real results, and it had a shadow that Descartes himself never fully reckoned with. It trained the Western intellectual tradition in the priority of critique. Doubt before affirmation. Destruction before construction. The method was supposed to be a phase. You doubt everything, find the bedrock, rebuild. But the method outlasted the bedrock. 2 centuries later, the rebuilding had stalled, and the doubting was still running. By the time Nietzsche arrived in the 19th century, he was not inventing the acid. He was noting that the acid had already eaten through the container. When Nietzsche announced in the parable of the madman and the gay science that God is dead, he was not celebrating. He was issuing a genealogical report. He was saying, the framework that held the Western moral tradition together, the framework that gave words like good and evil and truth their weight, has been dissolved by the very rationalism that claimed to be its heir. The cathedral is standing, but the foundation is gone. It will stand for a generation, then it will settle. Strauss read Nietzsche carefully, and what he saw was this. Nietzsche understood the problem more clearly than almost anyone. Modern man wanted to keep the biblical morality, the dignity of the individual, the wrongness of cruelty, the hope of justice, while abandoning the biblical faith that made those commitments coherent. Strauss saw that as an inheritance being spent without being replenished. You can live for a generation, maybe two, on borrowed moral capital. But borrowed capital runs out. And then came Max Weber. In 1917, the German sociologist Max Weber delivered a lecture at Munich University called Science as a Vocation. It became one of the most influential academic documents of the 20th century. Weber's argument was precise and, on its face, reasonable. Science, the rigorous investigation of how the world works, cannot tell us what we ought to value. Fact and value are separate domains. A sociologist studying a society can describe what people believe, but cannot, as a scientist, tell them whether those beliefs are right. To pretend otherwise is to smuggle ideology into scholarship. The honest scholar must practice what Weber called Wertfreiheit, value freedom, value neutrality, the deliberate suspension of all judgments about what is good. This sounds modest. It presents itself as humility. And in a narrow methodological sense, Weber was pointing at something real. You don't want your chemistry professor letting his political opinions distort his analysis of a molecule. But something happened between the seminar room of 1917 and the American University of 1970. Wertfreiheit migrated. It moved from being a methodological tool, a discipline applied within a specific research context, to being a cultural posture, a way of being educated, a mark of sophistication. The serious thinker does not make moral judgments. The rigorous mind suspends commitment. To hold a conviction strongly is to reveal that you haven't thought hard enough. Leo Strauss watched this happen from the inside. He had fled Nazi Germany in 1932, arrived in America, and taught for decades at the University of Chicago. And what he saw in the American Academy, in the social sciences, in the humanities, in the culture of the research university, was the Weberian posture fully naturalized. Not a method anymore, a faith. The faith that all values are equal because no value can be demonstrated to be true. The faith that commitment is naivete and suspension is wisdom. He wrote about this directly in Natural Right and History, published in 1953. His argument was precise and devastating. The claim that all values are relative, that no standard of good exists that reason can discover, is not a neutral scientific observation. It is itself a strong philosophical position. It presupposes that knowledge of the good is impossible, and that presupposition is not derived from evidence, it is asserted. The social scientist who tells you he is suspending all value judgments is, in fact, making a very large one. The judgment that the tradition which claimed to know the good was wrong. He just doesn't say so out loud, he calls it rigor. This is the machine, not a conspiracy, not a plot. A set of methodological commitments, developed over 3 centuries, institutionalized in the 20th century university, and delivered to your children as the air they breathed in every seminar, every textbook, every casual assumption made by every professor they respected. Now I want to bring in a voice that may be more familiar to this audience than Strauss. And I want to bring it in here because what this man saw from a Christian angle in 1943, a decade before Strauss published his diagnosis, confirms that this is not a political interpretation. It is a description of something real. C.S. Lewis delivered 3 lectures at the University of Durham in 1943. They were published as The Abolition of Man. The first chapter is called Men Without Chests. Lewis had been reading a British English textbook used in secondary schools, an ordinary classroom text, and he noticed something disturbing. The authors, in their effort to teach critical thinking, were systematically training students to treat all statements of value as statements of feeling, not of fact. When someone says that waterfall is sublime, the textbook authors said they are not saying something about the waterfall. They are reporting their own emotional state. The waterfall just is. The sublimity is in you, not in the world. Lewis saw immediately what this did. It trained a generation of students to regard all moral and aesthetic judgments, all claims about what is beautiful, what is good, what is worth dying for, as mere expressions of personal feeling, with no more authority than a preference for one flavor of ice cream over another. The head was educated, the critical faculties were sharpened, and the chest, the emotive center, the trained capacity for genuine moral response, was quietly removed. Men without chests, Lewis called them. And he said something that should stop you cold, if you've been watching this pattern in your own family. We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and then bid the geldings be fruitful. The cynicism isn't an accident. It isn't the product of bad character or weak faith or the wrong influences. It is the product of a pedagogy, a specific, teachable, transmittable method of instruction that removes the capacity for moral affirmation as efficiently as surgery removes a tumor. The patient survives. The patient is, in certain respects, sharper than before. But something is gone that does not grow back on its own. If you've been following this and you're ready to go further, the 10 texts I've spent the most time with, from Plato's Republic to the closing of the American Mind, are the ones that gave me a vocabulary for exactly what we're covering tonight. I put the core argument, the key passage, and the one question each book raises for a conservative Christian today on a single page, 10 pages. 10 texts. A place to start or a place to return. It's in the link in the description or pinned in the first comment. Now I want to pay off the question I left open at the beginning. If this is a machine with architects and blueprints, why didn't anyone warn us? Why did we send our children into it without knowing what it would do? The honest answer is that some people did warn us. Dostoevsky warned us in 1864. Lewis warned us in 1943. Strauss warned us in 1953. Alan Bloom warned us in 1987 with The Closing of the American Mind, a book that spent months on the bestseller list, which means this audience read it, felt the shock of recognition, and then watched the thing it described continue anyway. The warnings were issued, they were not acted upon. And that is its own lesson, worth sitting with. But here is what I really want to tell you. Here is the thing that the genealogy we've traced tonight makes visible, and that I don't think you'll find named this precisely anywhere else. The sophisticated cynicism you're watching in the people around you presents itself as an achievement. It presents itself as the hard-won conclusion of someone who thought carefully and discovered that there is nothing to believe in. It presents itself as rigor, as honesty, as the intellectual's version of courage, the willingness to face a universe that doesn't care about you, and to refuse the comfort of false hope. That self-presentation is wrong. Not wrong in the sense that the cynic is lying. Most cynics believe what they say. Wrong in the sense that they do not know where their conclusion came from. The value-neutral methodology does not produce cynicism by accident. It produces cynicism necessarily. If you begin with the presupposition that no value can be known to be true, that all moral claims are finally just expressions of feeling or cultural conditioning or power, then the longer and harder you think, the further you will travel from any capacity for affirmation. Thinking more carefully within that framework does not lead you toward truth. It leads you toward an ever more sophisticated version of the same emptiness. The underground man is not less educated than the man who believes. He is more educated. Within the machine, more education produces more paralysis. And here is the inversion that Strauss insists on, and that I want to plant in your mind before we close. The cynic who tells you he has escaped all dogma has not escaped dogma. He is resting on one of the most aggressive dogmatic claims in the history of Western philosophy, the claim that knowledge of the good is impossible. He did not derive that claim from evidence. He absorbed it from an institution that treated it as so obvious it didn't need to be stated. He was taught to see through every tradition except the one he was taught in. He is not free of the tradition. He is inside it, so deep that he cannot see the walls. This is Strauss's knife. Value neutrality is not neutral. It is a position. It is a philosophical bet, a very large one, that the entire tradition of natural right, from Aristotle through Aquinas through the American founders, was simply wrong to believe that human reason could discover what human flourishing required. That is not a modest scientific observation. That is a claim that requires argument, and it has never been adequately argued. It has only been assumed, and then transmitted with the full authority of the modern research university. Your instincts were tracking something real. The tradition you raised your children in was not naive. It was not pre-scientific or sentimental or the intellectual equivalent of a security blanket. It was part of a conversation, a very long, very serious conversation, about what it means to live well and what a society must hold in common to make that possible. That conversation was interrupted. It was not refuted. The machine did not beat it in argument. It simply replaced it, and then told the students who arrived that the replacement was progress. So where does that leave us? It leaves us here. The cynic in your life, your son, your colleague, yourself on certain evenings, is not a fool. He is not wicked. He is a man who was handed a solvent and told it was a philosophy. He was taught to destroy and never taught to build. And the destruction is real. I won't minimize it. You cannot simply tell someone who has spent 20 years training the critical faculty to just believe again the way a child believes. The road back, if there is one, is longer and harder than a single conversation, but it begins with understanding what happened. Not the culture went bad, or the universities got taken over. Those descriptions, while not without truth, are too vague to be useful. It begins with this. There was a specific methodological commitment, adopted at a specific moment in the history of the Western Academy, that made it institutionally impossible to transmit the idea that some things are genuinely better than others. Once you can name that commitment, trace its genealogy, and see that it was a philosophical bet rather than a settled scientific fact, you are no longer helpless in front of it. You are not fighting the culture. You are disagreeing with Weber. And disagreeing with Weber, it turns out, has a very long and distinguished tradition. Plato's Socrates never stopped at refutation. That is the thing almost everyone gets wrong about Socrates. We remember him as the great destroyer, the man who walked into the Athenian marketplace and dismantled the pretensions of politicians and poets and generals. And he did. But that was never the end of the conversation. The elenchus, the refutation, was always in service of something. There was always a further question driving the exchange. Not just you are wrong, but then what is right? Socrates drove towards something. He believed there was something to drive toward. The philosopher who only refutes is not a Socratic philosopher. He is the underground man who Dostoevsky was very deliberately placing underground, in the dark, cut off from the light. The tradition that trained in construction in the positive vision of what human beings are for and what they owe each other is older than the tradition that only destroys. It is not naive, it is not pre-critical. It went through its own crisis and came out the other side. And it is still there, waiting for anyone who wants to re-enter the conversation rather than simply watch from the sidelines. You are not watching a crisis, you are watching an arrival. This is what the machine was always going to produce, at the end of its cycle. The question that remains, the one I'll leave with you, is smaller than the one we started with, and harder. Not what went wrong with my son, or what happened to my country. Those are the right questions, and tonight I hope you have more of an answer to them than you did before. The question that remains is this. Now that you can see the machine, now that you know its name, its age, and what it cannot produce, what do you want to build instead? If there's one conversation with someone you love that this video gave you words for, tell me who it was with.